afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the afternoon shift. As Jimmy rightly pointed out, it is the late shift, but hopefully it'll be an entertaining session. I'm going to talk a little bit on SCA, where we are today, what we've seen, have we moved forward. I think that will come out in the panel, and maybe what I would like to see personally in the next 5 years. I should say I'm representing Nethone today, and I have my own company and CEO, founder of HTX Global. So Nethone as large, now it won't be a sales pitch, I promise, but Nethone is a cybersecurity fraud prevention company, do machine learning, know your user, they have modular technology, very much in the AI and machine learning space. Well, I did see an article about AI and everyone wanting to pause on how far we go into that because of the inherent problems that could come down the track around artificial intelligence taking over the world. I don't think that will be the case, but let's see. And then exhaustively, what we're trying to do is understand the client. And so part of what I see is complementary, really, is we've had huge fraud in the past. We tried to get sort of PSD2, SCA 3D Secure up and running. It's taken a long time. We finally got there and we've ticked the box. But I think if you look at the 360 plus fraud companies out there, trying to fall off stage, I'm embarrassing. The 360 plus fraud companies out there, I think you're probably using them to complement what we're trying to do regulatory and systemically today. 3D Secure is not the silver bullet, right? And we were just talking just before the session, actually, that there is still fraud within 3D Secure. And 3D Secure and SCA doesn't also account for friendly fraud. So if the goods weren't received, or I didn't like the service or the product, or buyer's remorse, it's not really protecting us as such. That's one problem. And then obviously, as you look further into 3D Secure, and I'm going to get onto it shortly, there is the inherent problem around how did 3D Secure, PSD2 and SCA kick off and where we're at with that, because there's still a lot of friction. And I've done a couple of clients recently and they thought everything was hunky-dory. And in fact, when you look at the kind of this tar brush of I've got 92% approval rate setting, if you delve into the statistics and you look at kind of declines, abandonment rate, etc., that's not the case. Nethone is a global company and does allow for 3D Secure as well as the fraud prevention piece. See a couple of clients there. These clients do obviously have implemented PSD2, but there's still inherent problems. SCA to 3D Secure correlation. So it's a requirement, and I was just talking outside over the last couple of days, and everyone's like, oh, but PSD3 is coming along. Great. What, in 3 years' time? I don't think it's tomorrow. And so PSD2 has a lot of shortfalls and shortcomings. And if we don't address it now, and the purpose of this presentation really is to say, okay, look, we've ticked the box. We have the ability to do exemptions. Why are we not doing exemptions correctly? Why they're not being utilized correctly? And why is the response when a message gets to an issuer, and it's not to hammer issuers if there are in the room, but when the message gets to the issuer, why is it not being taken on face value as it should do? And the responses that are coming back sometimes are quite odd. Let's just put it that way. So an example, a soft decline coming back as do not honor. That's not the correct response. So if you're sending a response back as do not honor, it's giving the merchant acquirer no room to maneuver. And so, of course, that particular transaction could fall over. Then there are other systemic issues. I'm sure Paul and co will, as we debate this on the couch here, there are other systemic issues in and around the implementation. But what's this all about, really? So it's all about data. So we spent the last, correct me if I'm wrong, 7 years-ish doing this and trying to tick a box. And then during that course of that 7 years, we've got fabulous companies out there like Nethone that are using data in the right way to try and protect your consumer base or your customer base. Why is that data important? Well, it's important because if you use the data in the right way and you look at the 5,000 to 8,000 attributes that any particular security company could use to identify Neil Smith, well, surely if I know Neil Smith and I trust Neil Smith, it must be Neil Smith. So as we debate here, and I'll be fairly controversial when I sit on the couch, why, as an industry, in 2023, do we feel the incessant need to involve a customer in an authentication? If you go back to the last 2,000 years, somebody wants to sell something and somebody wants to buy something. Now, I'm being flippant. Of course, there's fraud and there's fraud gangs and there's bots and there's everything else. But you have the right companies, the right tools, the right intelligence in this room. We've got the regulatory bit signed off. Let's think over the next 5 to 10 years, how do we use the data, protected data, in the right way to take the customer out of the equation? How many people use OTP as their preferred method for 1, 2? 2 had the whole room just use it. So, okay, so the rest of you use your banking app, right? This is why you're all in the industry. So if you imagine OTP, you've gone out for a hike, you're in the New Forest, and my wife, who's clearly got shares in Amazon, wants to make another purchase. Amazon's not a great example, but let's say it's an Apple Mac from Amazon. It still requires a code. We're in the New Forest. She makes a purchase. She waits for the code to come through, and the code doesn't come through. Then what? Because you've driven down the OTP route. I'm not a great fan of the app, if I'm honest. Apologies. Some banks are brilliant. We were just talking to one earlier, and some banks not so good. So the banking app, you get driven into a banking app, and I'm bank with a couple of different banks, and one's very well known. I get pushed into my banking app, and I'm in the industry. I'm in the banking app. I'm trying to get my face ID, and I've gone out the night before. My hair's over here, my eye's down there. It's not working. Eventually it works. It gets through. Then there's some other clunky mechanism to take me through that app to press a button to approve. And I go back to the merchant. There's not synchronous. So I get back to the merchant. Where's my product? It's gone. Hugely frustrating. I'm not the youngest chicken in the room, but if you look at my dad who's 80, imagine my 80-year-old dad trying to do either OTP or a banking app. Completely confusing. So the point I'm making is why, as an industry, with the data we have, let's debate it in a minute, can we not look forward? I'm not talking about let's try and correct PSD2 and make it PSD3. Let's use what we have to take the customer out of the equation. Probably done half my presentation talking. So if you look at the next 3 years, invisible payments. So just to clarify my point, no more OTP, less input inserted by the consumer, take them out of the equation. New standards, so behavioural biometrics, shock horror, that's been there for quite a while. Risk-based approach, so let's use all the expertise we have in this room and beyond, and let's move forward as an industry to get to where we need to get to, which makes the purchase of a good simple. If I walk into a store, I'll say get my card out, I don't even do that now. Use my phone, use my watch, I make a purchase, I walk out with the goods. Fairly seamless. Let's try and translate that into the digital world, is my opinion. And then the SCA from Europe to global. Acquirers, merchants in the room. So if a purchase is happening with a US card, why are we sending a 3DS transaction to the US that undoubtedly, for the most part, will be rejected? This is live stuff. I've got clients I'm working with now, and that one was a client was telling about 92 approval rate settings, actually 51%. A lot of that stems from where the transaction is originating from. Let's think about it. Take the bin, move it aside. It's the US. Make it non-3D secure. So Nethone is one company. There are lots of fraud companies out there, but not all of them necessarily play into kind of the exemptions, PSD2 space, pre-authorization, making the decision on the fly. But if we can utilize the tools that complement PSD2, SCA, 3D Secure, then why not? Because I think my approach on let's use biometrics and data is not going to happen overnight. I'm certainly not the spokesperson for that across the entire industry. So whilst that is something to think about, then let's use what we do have today and combine that collaboratively to make the transaction smooth. Because ultimately, it's all about the customer. If the customer wasn't there, then we wouldn't be here. And so the real important piece is you have to make the consumer the most important bit without compromising your security of your bank, the compromise the security of the merchant, and ultimately the payment schemes and the networks. So that's the most important thing, I think, is to think about the consumer. What does it mean to them? Because it's very well sitting there making the rules, but what does that mean to Joe Blow on the streets? And that's what I think we should be looking at. I'm going to take one point, actually. If you look at human behavior, we are very habitual in nature. I'm going to try a little exercise. This may go full flat on his face, but I'm going to try a little exercise. Hands up who has dinner in the evening. Keep your hands up if you sit at a kitchen bench or a dining room table. But the people with hands up, who sits in the same seat every single time? I rest my case. The point I'm trying to make on that is that we are unique to ourselves. We're a unique signature. So everything that we do identifies us. And if you're a fraud gang or a fraudster or a bot, you cannot mimic. I'm going to pick on Paul. You cannot be Paul Rogers. Only Paul Rogers can be Paul Rogers. And so use the data we have to identify Paul, as opposed to putting clunky methodology in place. I may offend people, but I think that's the way we need to go. Be smart about it. How do we turn this industry on its head to make it all about the customer? And because we've been doing this such a long time in the industry, Europe being leaders, into America, we have the ability at any point in that chain to make a difference, whether it's pre-authorization, post-authorization, in-flight, real-time, front end, before it reaches kind of the issuer-acquirer stage, wherever that is in that chain, we have the ability to make a difference to ensure that the transaction gets approved. The more approved transactions, the greater the business, the more revenue, keeps the industry turning. I've worked in fraud and risk for the majority of my life, and I've always felt that there's a balance. Yes, we can get rid of all fraud, but let's just switch the lights off. That's not the approach. The only way you can do it is mitigate it. There'll always be fraud. If somebody makes something, somebody will try and break it. And I suspect that we will need to mature into a better SCA 3DS environment, because ultimately there'll be more and more fraud that will eventually take place on that, because as criminals become more mature, as systems become better, so you get more exposed, more links in the chain, the greater the weakness. And so let's use, I'm going to finish off on this. Let's use the right information at the right time to make the right decision. There's greater control in doing that. They've got the right engines out there in terms of decision making, AI and machine learning. Has to always be complemented, in my opinion, with human interaction. I don't think you can just solely rely on that, because ultimately you have all these expertise within the industry. Leverage that, don't always rely on the machine. Let's complement both. If you're looking at Nethone as an example, as one of the vendors in the space, you have that complementary balance. You've got the fraud protection through artificial intelligence, machine learning. You have the ability to write rules if you're in that kind of fraud detection space. And then you have that human interaction piece, which is that data science bit, which is looking at all of that data to say, is it Paul? Is it Neil? Do we know them? Do we trust them? And I'm just about almost out of time. So I think it was fairly good. So thank you so much for listening. I think we're going to get really much more into it. There's a lot more we can talk about from an SCA perspective. Just wanted to set the scene, but let's think to the future. We've ticked the box. Now what? Thank you.